Hello everybody, thank you for joining. I'm going to be talking today about how we can bring diaspora languages into the classroom with a particular focus on the languages that we've been working with recently, Polish, Urdu, Romanian and Ukrainian. My name's Charlotte Ryland and I run two organisations local to Buckinghamshire, the Stephen Spender Trust, which is a charity, and the Translation Exchange, which is based at Oxford University. And these are both organisations that use translation and in particular literary translation as a way of promoting language learning and multilingualism and bringing rich, creative, multilingual activities into classrooms. There they are. So I'm going to talk to you today about our work with creative translation. And I'll be starting by explaining the background and rationale for our particular focus on creative translation. We work with all languages, but I'll be focusing in particular today on our work with diaspora languages in the UK. Then I'll be talking about what creative translation is and how it works in practice. I'll give you some examples of the projects that we've done with diaspora languages. So that you can really see how it works in practice. And finally, I'll give you some information about how you can get involved. But I'm starting today with what I'm calling two disconnects, or the multilingual elephant in the room. I've been thinking a lot about elephants recently, and I'll be talking about them a bit today. This is about, as I say, the background and rationale of why we use creative translation in the classroom. And the first disconnect is around MFL and EAL. Apologies for the acronyms. This is Modern Foreign Languages and English as an Additional Language. This sort of interest partly comes from my background, which was as a teacher and university lecturer in German. During the time that I was working for the university, I became particularly sort of interested in and concerned by what was happening with languages in schools, both a decline in the numbers of those learning languages, but also a decline in the value that people were attributing to knowing another language, regardless of what language it is. And one of the conversations that I had with a teacher while I was developing that work really stuck with me, and it's sort of echoed in my mind ever since. Here it is. When multilingual children arrive at school, they are excited by their home language and happy to share it with teachers and classmates. But as the years go by, they hang their heads when that language is mentioned. Their bilingual identity is socialised out of them. So this is a really wonderful teacher who I met, who worked in a primary school in Oxfordshire and was EAL, English as an Additional Language coordinator there, as well as an MFL teacher. And as I say, this idea has really been nagging at me ever since, and it seems that there was really something that we could address there. I'm not saying that this is the situation for all young people or in all settings, but it's this kind of idea is something that I've heard again and again from educators from various different settings, and it really does seem to be an issue that needs addressing, and there's an odd disconnect between our classrooms becoming a lot more multilingual in terms of what languages are there in the classroom spoken by the young people, and in terms of the decline in the numbers, and as I say, the kind of value of modern languages. And so bridging that disconnect is one of the tasks that we set ourselves at the Stephen Spender Trust. The second disconnect is about what you might call diversifying the curriculum, decolonizing the curriculum. It's related to this, and something that you'll be hearing a lot about will have been hearing a lot about recently. It's very current, some really important and great work happening in schools and universities and other settings around this. It's so current that as I was driving home on Monday, I happened to hear this radio programme on Radio 4 called Schools Apart, which was an absolutely brilliant listen. I really, really recommend it. It is I think he's a writer and producer, Anwar Akhtar, exploring how schools could help children from minority backgrounds feel integrated and included in modern Britain. And Anwar Akhtar talks in that programme, a half-an-hour programme, to English and history teachers and to school leaderships. But as far as I could tell, and I was concentrating on driving at the same time, but still, as far as I could tell, there was no mention of languages as a real opportunity to do this work of helping children from minority backgrounds to feel integrated and included in modern Britain. And this is where the elephant really starts to make itself felt for me, and there it is, not in a room in a jungle somewhere. But I find this again and again, that there's some, as I say, some really important work, some really interesting discussions happening, but languages rarely appear in those discussions. Many of you will be familiar with the background to this this issue. So in 2020, there was a report by Teach First, which found that all pupils could feasibly complete their English GCSE and leave school without studying a single author of colour. A 2018 survey by the Centre for Literacy in Primary Education found a sustained lack of diversity and representation in children's books. And there was a recent report from Penguin and the Runnymede Trust, which found a similar story, that less than 1% of English literature candidates answered a question on a novel written by a person of colour in the latest GCSE. So there's something really quite interesting going on here. And here is our elephant again, with the issues that it is hiding. Firstly, we've got declining numbers of MFL, and as I say, a decrease in the perceived value of being a linguist, of knowing another language. We've got a Eurocentric MFL, which is something I haven't mentioned yet, but again, really great work happening in this area at the moment. But thus far, historically, MFL curricula and textbooks and so on have been very Eurocentric, very little content, and not very inclusive content on Francophone North Africa or on Spanish-speaking South America, for example. We've got very multilingual classes in the UK, and a very publicly discussed now need for more excuse me, inclusive content in the curriculum. So these are the ideas that we're battling with and looking for answers to. And at the Stephen Spender Trust, our answer to this is to foreground and centre diaspora languages. So to acknowledge and proactively include diaspora languages in class activities. And our way of doing that is through an approach that we call creative translation. I'm now going to give you a bit of an insight into what we mean by creative translation. The best way to do that is simply to talk you very quickly through a creative translation workshop and what how that works in practice. And you'll see there we've got our model of decode, translate, create, which I'll be talking about in more detail shortly. So these workshops we do with primary school pupils and secondary school pupils, and also in community settings, and they work really well with families, very adaptable. Here we go. So we always start our workshops by creating a multilingual space in the room, whatever it is, and encouraging the participants to share the languages that they know, whether they've learnt them, whether they just know a few words, or whether they're languages that they speak fluently, or maybe only speak but don't write. And one of the ways we do this, or my favourite way to do this, is through our activity Multilingual Monsters. So we get a big piece of paper, a group of young people around the paper, and we ask them to draw a monster and then label it with as many words, label the body parts with as many words from different languages as they can. So you can see here some multilingual undersea monsters that were created in a primary school in Buckinghamshire as part of one of our projects with our translator Ruth Ahmedzai-Kemp. And it's a very, it's kind of literally leveling the playing field in terms of the languages. They're all sharing the same space. It's a very playful activity. You can see here we've got Billy the alien / octopus. There was obviously some discussion in that group about what they were actually drawing, but of course that's the beauty of this, that it holds lots of possibilities, and that in fact is something I'll come back to about translation. It holds lots of possibilities at once. We encourage them to include English slang in it, and as I say, all the languages that they can muster. And it's really wonderful to see what happens in an activity like this. Often the kids are finding out for the first time about the languages that their classmates speak. They're of course learning words from their peers. Everybody becomes an expert at this moment, and that is a key idea throughout our work. Having established that multilingual space, we then move on to translating a particular text. And what I'm just going to show you briefly here is a wonderful activity that was created by poet and translator Sasha Akhtar, who has been working with us for a couple of years, developing Urdu related resources and activities. And here she takes a class through the translation of a poem from Urdu into English by Ghulam Mustafa Tabassum. And the beginning of this text translation always starts with visual prompts. So it's a very gentle introduction to the text. We don't show them any text at this stage. If it's a picture book workshop, we're translating a picture book, we just show them some images from the book without any text, and they kind of do some ordering activities. Here, Sasha has created an image board with images that relate to the poem, and you're all educators in some way. You all can all imagine different activities that you could do to get the young people discussing what this could be, where it could be set, what could be happening in this poem, who the characters could be, and that is, as I say, a really gentle introduction to the text. They're then introduced to the text. I'm giving you quite a stripped back version of the workshop here. Depending on the group, you might add in some stages to kind of gradually introduce them to it. But the crux of the activity then is translating the text into English. And so here you have the original in a really lovely version, just photocopied out of a book. And then on the right, you can see Sasha's really beautiful glossary that she produced for this workshop. We always provide glossaries as part of our workshops because we want to show the young people that being a linguist isn't about knowing all the words, it's about knowing where to look, it's about knowing who to ask. Translators use paper dictionaries, online dictionaries, they ask their friends, they post questions on social media. It's a very sort of open and communicative task being a translator, and that's the experience that we're giving to the young people. So so there's always a glossary. It's not always as pretty as this one, but it means that the young people can do some sort of effectively matching activity, and what they'll end up with then is a very clunky word-for-word translation of the poem. At that point, we've got here a picture of them moving from translators to creators, or perhaps from literal translators to creative translators. And what we encourage here, if possible, is that the young people actually rip up the glossary that they've been working with. I think that would be a bit painful with Sasha's lovely glossary that she's produced. Usually they're just typed, and then it's not so difficult to rip it up and throw it in the bin. But that's a really great moment where you show the young people that they've become the experts now. They know this text, they know what it says, they know what it's trying to say. They've done some brainstorming about the mood and the imagery and so on, and they are now in a position to become the creators in this exercise. And here is Hearts and Children from one of our workshops, ripping up a glossary and gleefully throwing it into the bin. So the create part of the activity can be as straightforward as saying, okay, you've got this literal translation, it's clunky, let's work together to produce something that sounds very polished in English. But there are also then, as you can see on the slide here, lots of opportunities for further extension. So this is an activity that can take 45 minutes or 5 days, and everything in between. These are what you've got here are effectively different kinds of extended translation. So that final one encourages them to think about changing the medium. So a poem becomes a song, a picture book becomes a comic strip, a poem becomes a dance. We're going to look at an example of that happening later on. And then there are also opportunities for kind of reimagining. So as you see in number 1, can you place this poem in a different country from where it's set, or rewrite this picture book for a different time era? So from moving it from the 20th century to the 21st century would be an obvious one. There are all sorts of opportunities to take this further. So what you find there is that you can end up with something that is actually an original, effectively, it's a contentious word, is a new piece of writing by these young people, often done together in a group. But instead of it coming out of a blank piece of paper, which can be intimidating and put off certain who don't kind of identify themselves as writers or creators, because it's such a scaffolded, phased approach, they all end up creating and writing something new, without, in some cases, kind of realizing that they're doing it. Okay, so that was a whistle-stop tour through a translation workshop. Here you can just see that broken down into our model, which is a model that we've developed over the past 12 years of our schools programs. And the reason that we've done this is that we really want to make this work as accessible as possible to as many people as possible. So ideally you can take any text from any language, any country, and slot it into our decode, translate, create model, and run with it. So we start at the bottom with decode. That was, in the example I gave you, that's the image board where they're thinking about sort of decoding the context and thinking about what the poem is about. Then they move on to translation with the glossary, and then finally they have that create phase that I was just talking about. This can work with different kinds of texts: poetry, picture books, prose, films, songs, and crucially, it has this relationship to real life, as you can see on the screen now. This is what a translator does every time they translate a text. They decode, they translate, and they find creative solutions. And a lot of our work is delivered by translators, and so if that happens, then the young people also have the experience of meeting a real life translator who's using languages. They're often multilingual individuals themselves, and they're using languages in their everyday lives in creative ways, and also making a living out of it. So that can be a really inspiring experience. Okay, so we've talked a bit about why we do this work, our elephant in the room, and then I've just talked you through our standard workshop and the model that we use for all of our activities. I'm now just going to give you a few examples of actual projects that we've run using these activities. And this starts with our first project in 2010, which ran in East London in super diverse primary schools. And it was called Translation Nation. And how this worked was that young people were encouraged to bring in folk tales from in other languages. They shared them with their peers, they translated them together, and then they performed them. Families were invited in at certain points to join in, and at the end there was a public performance of their collaborative translations. The Big Translate is a similar project that ran after Translation Nation, which had very similar structure, but the instead of folk tales, they were translating picture books from different cultures and then performing their translations at the end. As I say, this was the first project that the Stephen Spender Trust ran, and the feedback that we got was really, really interesting and powerful. You can just see two examples here. Two Somali children would not even admit that they spoke a language other than English until they took part in the project. By the end, they were correcting people and directing people in speaking their language, says one of the teachers. And then one of the translators noted that two students, a Turkish speaker and a Polish speaker, who are normally withdrawn and lower ability, really shined in a way the teacher was not expecting. So that sort of feedback gave us, sort of motivated us to continue this work further. And the next project that I'm going to talk about is the Stephen Spender Prize, which has actually been running for a long time. It's been running since 2004, but over the past few years, we've worked very hard to bring it together with our schools programs, and also to really explicitly open it up to diaspora languages. So the last couple of years, we've had translations from 80 languages entered by people of all ages, from 5-ish to 100, let's say. The changes that we've made are, for example, that we've developed virtual resources for languages and English teachers and for young people, and that includes virtual booklets of poetry in 17 languages. So if you don't know where to find a poem to start, then you can find those on our website. We've also worked hard to put diaspora languages and modern foreign languages, the ones that are traditionally taught in school, on an equal footing. And part of the way that we've done this is through having annual spotlights for languages that are widely spoken in the UK, for example, Polish, Urdu and Romanian over the past 3 years. And I just wanted to share this quote with you, which came from Nadia Siddiqui, who's head of modern languages at a secondary school in Slough. The Stephen Spender Prize celebrates not only poetry, languages and translation in general, but multiculturalism, diversity and community spirit, which are exactly the things that students should be exposed to throughout our country. We submitted 56 entries in 25 different languages. So I love this for multiple reasons. One is that although being head of modern languages, Nadia really found a way to turn this into a whole school project. And that's how she got so many young people translating from so many different languages. She had an internal competition, and lots of schools are starting to do this now, have an internal poetry translation competition, and then also enter everybody into our national competition. And here, I'm just going to show you a couple of example entries. These were winners from last year from our Urdu spotlight. And you may notice here that we've actually got the same poem. So even given two different titles by the translators. And one of the reasons I'm showing this is that it shows how versatile and flexible the activity of translation is. This is the same poem, but it's even how it looks on the page is completely different. It's translated. This was the 18 and under category, and then on the right is the 14 and under category. So the same poem has been approached by different age peoples from different backgrounds, and that kind of speaks to one of the things that we are trying to do with this work, which is to ideally take one text and then make sure that through scaffolding and differentiation it can be translated and played with by young people of all ages and backgrounds. And so this is a really nice example of that. Okay, so creative translation in the classroom is a project that we started about 4 years ago, and we've been supported in running this project by the Rothschild Foundation, which is one of the reasons that I came to be involved in today's conference. And for that reason, we've been working in particular in Buckinghamshire and Oxfordshire with some wonderful teachers in schools in the primary and secondary sector. And really what creative translation in the classroom does is it brings together everything that I've been talking about so far. So translation workshops, translators delivering workshops, teachers delivering workshops, and the Stephen Spender Prize. It is a year-long partnership between a translator and a teacher, but the aim is that there's a sort of gradual move from the translator delivering the activities to the teacher delivering the activities. So the translator works with the teacher to develop workshops and resources that work particularly well for that setting, but the teacher is then also encouraged to adapt and develop independently so that they can use these activities in future years. And the photograph you can see here is of some work that our translator Georgia Wall did with a primary school in Buckinghamshire. So this is year 6 doing some work on Haiti. And this is a really nice example of what I was talking about earlier on in terms of the Eurocentric MFL. So this is still French, class, but it's taking it out. There's no mention of Paris, there's no Eiffel Tower. It's taking it out of that standard context and looking at it from a different perspective. There's some craft in there, as you can see. The kids made videos, really wonderful, creative, very engaged work that they took part in. So, as you can see, part of our trajectory is moving from translator-led to teacher-led activities. So we're not moving away from translator-led. It's absolutely wonderful when a translator comes into a school to deliver a workshop and is able to have those conversations with young people about how wonderful it is to live and work with languages. But in order to increase the numbers who are able to benefit from this activity, we're now moving towards supporting teachers to deliver it. And in the Diaspora context, we've done this through our Spotlight programs. So you can see here the last 3 years of our Spotlight. You can also see where we rebranded. So we started with the Polish Spotlight, and then Urdu, and this year is Romanian. And this follows basically a 3-phase program. It starts with workshops that are designed and co-led by teachers and translators. Then the translator designs resources for the teacher to use independently. And as I say, the teacher is really encouraged to take that as material that they can adapt and develop as they see fit for their particular class or classes. And the decode, translate, create model that I've talked about really helps for this, helps to kind of provide a structure for the teacher to hang this on. And then finally, there is a strand of the Stephen Spender Prize, so of our poetry translation prize, there's a strand of that called the Spotlight, which is just for translation from that particular language. So this year it's Romanian. The deadline is the 15th of July, next week. And we curate booklets of poetry in that Spotlight language, that, which are particularly chosen to be accessible to young people, and so that they immediately have ideas for poems that they can translate. And as I said, this work has been generously supported by the Rothschild Foundation along with other funders, and it's been really, really wonderful to develop this with them in Buckinghamshire. So a little tour now through what some of these Spotlight resources look like. We start with Polish. Here you can see a picture, an illustrated poetry book by a poet called Michał Rusinek, who came over at one point to run some workshops with us and gave us access to these wonderful texts. And you can kind of see here an example of that movement from just image to text. And the great thing about this poem is that it actually also has an animated video of the poem, which is made by the poet's sister. And we also have access to that, and so that's a really lovely, it makes it a really kind of multimedia experience for the young people. You can see here the glossary that I talked about. Here a reminder that you can try this even if you know no Polish at all. So we've done this in groups where there might be a couple of Polish speakers who become the experts for that hour, but most don't know any Polish. They might not know where Poland is at the beginning of the hour, but by the end they've all translated a Polish poem into English. Urdu I've talked about already, so I'm just going to briefly show an example here. This is Sasha Arta, our wonderful poet and translator who's been developing this work with us, and here is the opening of a translation workshop that she developed for primary school on song and sound in oral traditions. And of course, this lovely picture here reminds us that although different alphabets you may think that that's kind of a difficult thing for young people to access, actually it creates all sorts of opportunities for visual and art engagement. And Sasha developed some lovely activities for the young people, sort of getting them familiar with the shapes and the sounds through drawing, and so often bringing another alphabet in can be a really, really rich part of the process. This year we're working with Romanian, and our translator Marina Sofia developed this workshop, which is all about a New Year tradition in Romania called the goat dance. And so you can see here we have our image board, getting them introduced to the context, and then gradually we move towards some words. Here's some about the chorus, ta ta ta, kapri ta ta, and I probably pronounced that incorrectly, sorry Marina. And after that sort of introduction, they then do some work on the text, and here you just have the original and literal translation, which they can play with and develop. And then I can't show you, unfortunately, but there's a lovely video of one of the groups that Marina worked with, having made goat masks and then actually doing the goat dance in their classroom. You can imagine what that's like, a whole group of primary school children sharing in that Romanian tradition, having looked at the text and played with it and learned about the tradition. So that's what we've done so far with the spotlights. We're now moving on to our Ukrainian spotlight for the coming school year, which is going to be a series of creative translation days at primary schools. And these will be based on workshops that are being designed at the moment by writers and translators that we're working with who are currently in Ukraine. They'll be led by one of our facilitators, and initially they will be for whole classes. So for example, the translator would be there for the whole day and work with a year 5 class in the morning and the other year 5 class in the afternoon. Then in the lunchtime or after school, they may run a workshop for the Ukrainian children who are in that school, so you can have a slightly different focus where you do more work with the language, and followed up by resources for teachers to use independently, as I've discussed. And we haven't made the final decision yet, but we think that our prize next year will focus on, our spotlight prize will be on Ukrainian, so that there will be the booklet that we talked about and the activities, and the prize for the winners, which includes cash and publication in our booklet and online. So as I've said, these workshops are for schools initially, but the structure will be completely transferable to community groups, so families working together to translate. Okay, final part of my talk now. I'm just going to summarize a bit some of the things that I've said about creative translation, why we do it, how it works, why it works. So firstly, just looking at the key materials, hopefully I've showed that you can do this kind of activity with any text. In practice, it's a really straightforward and easy way of bringing inclusive and diverse texts into the classroom, and that is our focus as a charity, is to do that. It's also a very visual activity, so we always start with visual prompts, as you see, in that gentle sort of scaffolded way into the text. We provide adaptable templates that teachers can use, and we're open to all resources, including Google Translate. We encourage the young people, if they are using Google Translate, to use it critically and to realise what the limits of the machine are and where their creativity needs to come into play. Key skills and competencies, it's very collaborative, which I perhaps haven't talked about that much today, but all of these activities can be done individually, but I would always recommend that it's pair work and group work and swapping groups and sharing ideas, performing to each other at the end. It's task-based, and we often talk about the young people becoming a language detective while they're doing this work. So with that image board at the beginning, we thought about, you know, they're inferring, they're deducing what the poem might be about, inference, deduction, and decoding, code cracking. All of these things are happening. There's all sorts of skills being activated when you translate. So creative translation is accessible and inclusive, playful and adaptable. It democratizes success, by which I mean that it's not only for those who have really good memories and so don't need to look at a dictionary. It's not just for those who speak another language at home, or who speak the language that's being taught in the school. It's not just for those who are particularly good at grammar. It's creates a level playing field for everybody. It celebrates multilingual knowledge, and it also breaks down those linguistic hierarchies that I talked about at the beginning. It's collaborative, it's cross-curricular. We've had some great examples recently of teachers working with English departments, with art, food tech, media studies. There's all sorts of opportunities. It develops creativity, of course, and it promotes resilience and tolerance of ambiguity. So there's a bit, especially in languages, there's can be quite a lot of red pens around, and a focus on accuracy. And what creative translation does, as I said earlier on, is it kind of holds lots of possibilities in place. You saw that poem, that Speak poem, that had two different versions. They are both valid responses to that poem, both valid versions of that poem. So it really helps helps young people to tolerate that ambiguity and to have to create that sense of openness and lots of possible truths. Finally, my 3 C's for why we do this work with translation and why translation works so well. It produces content for the classroom that is meaningful, that's real life, that's very engaging and rich. That content is cultural, and that, as I've said, that culture can be, if you choose, incredibly inclusive, and it's real culture, real life culture. And finally, this idea of community, which is absolutely central to what I've been talking about today. When young people translate together, they become part of a community of linguists who are doing this kind of thing all the time. Everyone is a translator. Languages are not just some esoteric thing that you do as part of your schooling, but they're something that can take you through your life, and that happens sort of through the generations. So that idea of community is really central. So to finish, if you're interested in the sort of underpinnings of this work, Sam Holmes and Sarah Arditsoni were the originally developed Translation Nation and the Stephen Spender Trust's original work with schools. And they've written about this in a chapter that you can see on the screen. And just one example of that piece talks about inclusion and educational development as the sort of the key principles and aims of creative translation, enlisting and enhancing people's existing linguistic skills. It's a really fantastic way of thinking about it. So 5 tips for starting your creative translation journey. If you'd like to get involved in any of this work, I will also paste this into the chat. There's the Stephen Spender Prize with a deadline of next week, but if you register on our website as a teacher, then we'll find out about everything that we're doing next year for this. You can host a translation workshop in your school. We run webinar series for educators that are introducing you to the principles and the activities that you can do with your pupils. We have lots of virtual resources that are just ready to pick up and use or adapt as you see fit. And as I say, our Ukrainian project is very live at the moment. If you're interested in taking part in this, then do drop me a line afterwards, and I'd be really happy to talk some more about it. And there is our website. I'll also put these into the chat, and our social media handles. That's all I wanted to say today. Thank you so much for listening and joining in, and I'll stick around a little bit to answer questions, but thanks ever so much. Thanks ever so much for listening. Bye.